you might split these 4 items into 2 different groups? Here we go. Feel free to write these down. And if you come up with one way of splitting the groups, see if you can think of another. Once you've thought of another, keep being creative. Often it's like the next idea and the next idea that then start to get quite interesting. Yeah, I can see a couple of ideas coming through in the chat actually. What I particularly love about this introductory example is that there are always such different things that people notice. You share this example with your students or with your staff, your colleagues in the staff room, and they're going to have some really interesting insights that they pick up. Like Tracy's, I just saw Tracy mention hair and no hair. That's one that I've pretty much never heard before. So it's great. You're going to have some really creative and interesting insights. So if you've got one to share it in the chat, and then we're going to go and look at another example. So I'll give you a moment to type in any of those last ones into the chat. All right, so this next example is exactly the same question, but this time we're going to start to get a little bit more mathematical. So here it is, and have a think. And again, once you've got one idea, I encourage you to see if there are other ways of splitting these items that you can think of. All right, I'm going to share some of the responses that I've typically seen teachers and students have to this. There might not be the response that you have, but there's some that, I don't know, for whatever reason, seem to commonly crop up. So here they are. And see, have a read through and see if your response is in here. If it's not, if you can't see your response in here, what I'd love you to do is to share it in the chat so that others can learn from you. We often find that there is one person in the group who asks a question that they're kind of unsure of, but then it leads to a real aha moment. And that's what ones like the second bottom dot point lead towards, where you've got one group, opposite sides are parallel, that has 3 of the items, and another group, no parallel sides, only has 1 item. And suddenly people realize, oh, we don't have to have groups with the same number of items. And so it starts to lead to even more possibilities. All right, thanks for those ones that are in the chat. These are some really nice, different insights as well. So if you haven't looked in the chat, have a look at what other people are sharing about possible ways of splitting these 4 items. Now, I often see that this question is actually the starting point for going even deeper with your students. And that's what I love about this routine is you can do it really quickly with one question. And then you can find opportunities to dig deeper, to get students to hone their understanding of the categories that they've come up with and to also sharpen their language. If they've heard other kids in the classroom use particular words, you can encourage them to use that word as well, to start to take on precise mathematical vocabulary into their own practice. So let me share a couple of questions that you might follow up with once you've posed this initial prompt. So let's say you've got your two groups that you split your items into. The next question might be, well, what else could you add to each of your groups? Okay, this is really requiring students to have a careful understanding of the definitions of the groups that they've created. And then you might ask, well, what's something that doesn't fit into each group? Okay, if we've got 2D and 3D shapes, what might we have? We could have a line that doesn't fit into each group. Okay, we're getting students to see beyond just black and white terms of categories and to start to think about the shades of grey or the colour of mathematics. That there's sometimes more than meets the eye to the ideas that they're looking at. All right, then you might have another question of, can you find a different way to split the original items into two groups? And I really recommend this question, even if you've gotten students to share their groupings in the class, because often there are these really interesting other ideas that just haven't gotten surfaced yet, and maybe students don't yet feel comfortable to, but you're giving them the space to give those interesting, different left of center ways of thinking. Okay, and then finally, one of my other favorite follow-up questions is, well, okay, we're dealing with two groups, but what if there were three groups? What might that then look like? And again, what you're doing is getting students to really carefully shift gear and start to look at four very perhaps simple items, but in a quite different way. And it can be quite fascinating, the sorts of insights and the sorts of conversation that arises even after just one of these follow-up questions. Now, I want to share with you where else you might go with these prompts. All right, so we've looked at one set of prompts with animals, which is a great one for introducing this routine, and another one with shapes. But there are many different directions that you can keep going in. So let me show you, and I'll just flip through these. Okay, this one with numbers, great for students in elementary years, perfect for students in secondary years as well. You can really start to bring in some of the higher level concepts that they're looking at in high school, factors, multiples, prime numbers, composites. You can break it into all sorts of different ideas in terms of what they're looking at kind of as you get higher and higher. Down to the lower years, it might be odds and evens or greater than and less than. Okay, so even an example like this can be very interesting. All right, here's another one. This one, you'll notice there are no numbers on here. It's been very specifically designed to help students to focus in on particular features of the graph. So this one, you might use it if you want students to be thinking about axes, quadrants, gradients, the idea of origin, okay? Some things where you don't want them to be kind of overcomplicating the situation, but you just want them to sharpen their focus into what's going on within that graph. Yeah, there's great insights in the chat. Thank you. So I recommend when you're choosing these sorts of examples to go to something that isn't yet at that high level of challenge, but something that you know is going to be quite accessible, and give students a space within that accessible example to really go deep, okay? And to expect them to be able to back up their ideas and to make new connections. They're not just looking at these examples at a surface level, but they're perhaps noticing features that they wouldn't have considered if they were just doing examples from a worksheet or the textbook. Now, I first came up with this routine after reading a paper by two maths education researchers by the name of John Mason and Anne Watson. And there was a quote from their paper that really stuck out to me, and it was this one. They observed that maths isn't just strictly defined, where once you know the rules, that's all you need to know. They noticed that there are these edges where interesting things start to happen. And that's at those edges where we get the deepest understanding of what's happening with different concepts. And so two groups is really designed to help students to uncover the edges to mathematical ideas. There are a few other things that two groups can help students with, but maybe you have a think about it first. What would you expect your students would get out of doing this routine, two groups? What might it help them to understand about maths or understand about their practice? Yeah, we've got vocabulary, sharing ideas, talking, mathematical discourse. Confidence, absolutely. Flexibility, flexibility. Thanks, Kathy. That's at the heart of fluency, one of our proficiencies. Okay. Students are flexible when they know how to translate between different ideas, when they know which strategy and method to draw on. Precision with communication. Great. There's no right or wrong answer. There are certain situations, absolutely, where there are different right answers that are completely justifiable. Okay, these are awesome. Okay, and some of the ones that I'm going to share on the screen in a moment are already covered in the chat. But let me show you the list I came up with. So, two groups allow students to focus on the subtleties and the fuzzy edges of concepts. It helps them to see the connections between ideas. They're starting to look at what's similar and what's different between ideas. Okay, they're not just mindlessly going through examples, but the students themselves are taking ownership of those examples and seeing how they relate. It gives students an opportunity to articulate their thinking. This isn't silent maths, this is talking maths. This is a chance to air themselves and to show that their voice matters in maths class. They're using mathematical reasoning, one of the other proficiencies here. And I think really importantly, they're learning from their peers. It's showing them that maths class, you can learn from everyone, not just the teacher. Okay, so there's quite a lot that's going on with this one routine. But I want to take a step back for a moment, and I want to look at what's really a common idea that gets talked about within education circles, but also more broadly in the community about routines in the maths classroom. When we think about routines, this is the view that we often get. This kid who looks frankly quite bored or confused, and she's thinking about these long rows of problems that she has to do one after the other. To me, this is the elephant in the room when we talk about routine, and it's almost impossible, I find, to have a conversation about maths teaching without hearing the phrase drill and kill and why it doesn't belong in the classroom. So I want to acknowledge this, but I also want to share a different view, a different perspective on considering why routines matter and what they might offer to us and to our learners. Habits, rituals, and routines, they give students structure and regularity. And when they're used purposely, not just as a time filler to keep students mindlessly busy, I actually see that they're an essential base for deeper and more complex thinking. So routines give space for what we value. It's a bit like when we get into this habit of brushing our teeth a couple of times a day, we're giving space for valuing our health, our dental health. Or if we have the routine of eating dinner as a family, we're giving space for having a small amount of time every day with our family. And so I encourage you throughout the rest of this session to keep reflecting on what's being given space for in today's routines. And this is something that you might indeed go back to your own classroom next week and have a think about. And in fact, one thing that I invite you to do now is to share some of those values. And we're going to be using a tool that might be familiar to a lot of you called Mentimeter. And I invite you to think about this question. What do you most value in your maths classroom? You can share your ideas to this one, not in the chat, but you'll see at the top there is a URL, menti.com/, and then there is that link. I'm going to share it in the chat as well. Or you can go straight to menti.com and use the code 81492691. So open that up and share your ideas. What do you most value in the maths classroom? All right, here is the link in the chat now. Hopefully make it a bit easier for you. I can see some of those responses coming through. And what I'm going to do a bit later in the session is share a word cloud that shows what our collective set of values are. And we might start to see some common themes that actually exist across our practices from where we are across the world. And I think what's quite fascinating is, although there can be some big differences between us, there can be some really important similarities that exist as well. So I can see some of you writing your values in the chat. Thanks for sharing them. Can you also hop on to menti.com and use that code that's up on the screen to share your values? I'm going to put the URL once more in the chat. You can also head on straight into that URL to share your values that you share in the maths classroom. All right, let's take a couple more moments to do that. I can see that word cloud is building up quite big now. It's interesting. I'm watching it come through, and there's one word that's just stuck in the middle since the very start, and a couple of others that are becoming quite fixed as well. I'm going to share those, the whole word cloud with you very soon. Okay, once more, I'll share the URL in the chat so you can put your values into menti.com and be part of this giant word cloud that we're creating. While you're finishing up, let me share one more quote. And this is one that really, I would say, it got me on this line of thinking about routines. I've always spent a lot of time thinking about problem solving and low floor, high ceiling tasks. But more recently, I've been thinking about the value of routines. And a lot of that was started as a result of this particular quote from Edward de Bono. De Bono said that thinking should be free, unfettered, and open-ended. The tighter the framework for the thinking, the freer the thinking can be within that framework. And I find this fascinating, this apparent contrast between tight frameworks, yet open, creative, free thinking. And de Bono's words here are a valuable reminder that if we want our students to be strong, confident, and critical mathematical thinkers, careful structure can set them free. Okay. And I think you, as the teacher in your classroom, you are the best placed person to know and understand what collectively for your students makes the most sense in terms of structure. Some structures will hamstring and they will constrain in a way that isn't helpful. But other structures, like these routines that I'm sharing with you today, can really open up. They can create feelings of safety and confidence and free thinking in the classroom. All right, let me give you a bit of time to reflect now. I want you to take 30 seconds to jot down 3 things you've learned so far this session. All right, over to you. You'll see this bar on the screen moving across. All right, and there is our little icon for this particular session. What I'm doing is just getting a copy of our word cloud to share with you very soon. And if you'd like to share in the chat one of the things that you jotted down, go on and do that. And I'm going to make available this word cloud so we can all check it out in just a moment and see some of the really interesting things that actually came through in your responses about what you value. All right. That's coming across in just one moment. Okay, there we go. There's our word cloud. So the word that's stuck in the middle as you were from the very start to as you continued to put in responses was this blue one, thinking. Okay, there is a very common value in this group towards thinking. But you can also see that there's a few other ones that are quite common as well, like collaboration, engagement, discourse, flexibility over on the side here. Okay, I will make these slides available to you at the end. I'll let you know exactly how you can get access to these, including this word cloud, so you can check it out later. I encourage this tool Menti as a great one for, again, seeing common ideas that exist across a room, whether it's with your students or with colleagues. It can be a really wonderful way with colleagues of actually getting you to have rich, insightful conversation about your values or about other parts of your practice, maybe things that you're observing and things that you're seeing as strengths right now. All right, let's keep going on. So there are a few elements that underpin two groups, the first routine I showed you and the second routine I'm going to be showing you today. And so I want to take you through exactly what these elements are so that you can think about them in terms of other routines that you might be doing in your classroom as well. So the routines are short and repeatable. They're designed to be able to be used for just a small segment of your lesson, but also repeated over time so that your students can come back, be familiar with the structure, and then keep going deeper. After a while, they won't have to think about, how the routine works. They'll be ready to go. And because of this repeatable structure, joyfully, they're quick to plan. So it's nice to have this element of your teaching, another one to add to your toolkit, where you don't need to also think too much about what you're doing. After a while, you'll start to notice good examples to include with two groups or the other routine, and it'll become easier and easier for you to integrate it into your planning. Now, one thing that I also mentioned before that I'll mention again is that these routines allow all students to access the maths. They're not designed to trick students. They're designed to give all students something to think about that's relevant and important to them. Okay, a lot of teachers I know will choose examples that are from the current topic that they're focusing on. Some teachers I know use examples from the last topic they looked at or something that's happened recently. So as a way to refresh the maths that students have been learning about. But the point is, it is maths that they know students can access so that they can then go deeper through that example. Okay, now let's have a look at what this second routine is and how these first three elements of a maths routine fit into it. It's called which is larger? And the question that for you to think about and for your students when you share it is, which is larger out of two elements that you'll see, or are they the same? Now, if we're running this with a class, we might start with an example like this one. This unit fraction example is one that a lot of students actually find quite difficult, particularly if they don't have some sort of mental model of how fractions work. This is not just in elementary students, but into middle school and even high school students. Today, though, we're going to start with this example. So I want you to have a think about it, and also to have a think about how you know which one is larger. And then without pressing enter, type your answer in the chat. Just have it sitting there ready to go, but don't press enter yet. Okay, and when you're ready, type your answer in the chat and hit enter. Okay, great. It's really lovely seeing some of those reasons come through as well. What we're going to do is look at a couple of the common reasons that come up in relation to this one. And then if you have something that isn't mentioned, then I'd really love you to share it in the chat. So let's have a look at the common responses that come up. And it might be your one that you see in this list. So a lot of students will compare to a half. So they'll notice that 3/6 is equivalent to a half, and 3/5 is actually greater than a half. So 3/5 is larger. Okay. Some students will compare to a whole. This is not a strategy that came naturally to me, but I actually really love it. I think it's a very interesting one. So they'll see that 3/5 is only 2/5 away from a whole. 3/6 is 3/6 to a whole. There is a lot less to get to a whole in 3/5. So 3/5 is larger. They'll compare to the unit fraction, particularly if you've started off with that example of 1/5 and 1/6. A lot of students will come back to this. So students will typically use some sort of visual model with this approach. Okay, they might think of an area model and think about what the 1/5 size parts look like, and then what the 1/6 size parts look like. Or they might even use a number line, okay, and think about what the divisions along the number line between 0 and 1 are, and therefore where the fifths are up to 3/5 and where the sixths are up to 3/6. Okay. Many students will create equivalent fractions. This is quite a common one if students don't have a visual model in their mind of fractions. You're actually learning a lot about your students' understanding of fractions and how they think of it through an example like this. So if they're using equivalent fractions, they might typically they'd go to 30ths. So that'd be 18 30ths for the 3/5 and 15 30ths for the 3/6. Okay. Or often there'll be something else that comes up. So if you didn't use one of these other strategies that I've just gone through, can you please share it in the chat so the rest of us can learn from you? Monique, would you ask which is larger and why? Yes, definitely add in that element of asking for a justification. Thank you. Betty, you went to percentages. Fantastic. Yes. And it's very interesting. There will be students who just find it so much easier to think in percentages or decimals. Katie's got one. When the numerator is the same, the smaller denominator makes the size bigger. Katie, my follow-up question to you, because I love the sound of this rule, it sounds like a really great one to follow. I want to know why. Why does that work? The numerators are the same, so that would make the second fraction smaller since it has a larger denominator. Dustin, I'm following up with the same question to you. I want to know why that works. That sounds like a great reason. Elizabeth has created a mental image of fractions with bars. Robert's turned it into a decimal. Great. Debbie, you've drawn them. I'd love to see your drawing. I know it's hard to share in this space. Michael, wonderful. Thank you for sharing that different one. You're thinking in terms of division. 3 divided by 5 is larger than 3 divided by 6. Okay, and I think there's actually quite a nice link between Michael's reasoning and the couple of examples that were given where they talked about the numerators being the same and the denominators different. I know that fifths are larger than 6 and they both have thirds, says Michelle. Fantastic. Lisa says, I knew 3 was half of 6, but 3 is more than half of 5. Yes. Yes, that's that strategy of comparing to a half. It's amazing once you see it, how quickly the answer can pop up. Okay, these are really fantastic. And all we've done is look at 2 fractions, okay? There is a lot of strategic thinking, a lot of conceptual understanding of fractions that's being shared in here. Now, just imagine if you're giving students in your classroom questions like this on a regular basis. You're annotating on the whiteboard as they're sharing. So you're helping them to see that their ideas are credible and you're keeping track of the ideas so that their peers can follow on and learn from them. Okay, very quickly, your students are going to be strongly growing their repertoire of strategies for dealing with fractions. And what you'll find is that quite quickly, you can bump up the questions. And I'm going to show you in a moment of where you might go after an example like this. But first, let me tell you a little bit more about those elements of maths routines. We've looked at 3 so far. They're short and repeatable, they're quick to plan, and they allow all students to access the maths. Here's a fourth one. These maths routines invite observation, strategy, and reasoning. Okay, we're getting students to slow down their thinking on one problem at a time and really give space to that problem. Okay, and we're allowing multiple strategies to be highlighted, which helps to build capacity across those proficiencies again. Okay, so by looking at these different strategies, like with the fractions, that's that fluency coming in. Identify good strategies to use for different problems. By comparing examples, okay, trying out which is larger in this set of examples and then which is larger in the next set of examples, we're forming connections, which is all about understanding. Okay, so proficiencies are very present in this sort of routine. And the next element that you've probably picked up on right now is they're purposefully crafted. We're not just getting any sort of example, we're getting an example that gives students a reason to think, and it gives you, the teacher, an opportunity to learn about what your students know. So it's a really great formative assessment tool. Okay, and you also know that you're going to be able to lead your students to a particular point of understanding. You might want them to be thinking about fractions or a strategy with fractions in a particular way. So you use an example where you know that this strategy will come up. Okay, and you might help spotlight a student in the class who's used a strategy that you think is really valuable for others to understand. Now, let's see where else you might go with that last fraction example that you showed. You might follow up with something like this. You can start to get quite challenging quite quickly, and it's going to depend, of course, on what your students are ready for. Okay, you can keep the examples at a similar level of difficulty to help them to just keep practicing those same strategies that have come up, or you can go deeper and deeper. Okay, definitely depends on where your students are for. But seeing questions like this used with great success, or even questions like this, okay, it becomes very difficult once you're dealing with 25ths and 26 to understand or to visualize the size of the parts in the same way. Some students can certainly do it, but it does become more difficult. Okay, so through the choice of examples, you're going to be implicitly encouraging your students to hone their attention in a different way. The last element of the maths routine, which I've already touched on, but I'll repeat again because it's so important, is that it gives you rich insights, okay? Gives you insights in a way that you would not get if your students are working on their own silently. It gives you rich insights in a way that you would not get if your students are sitting there doing a worksheet or working out of a textbook. Okay, and by nature of being a short whole class activity, you can quickly get a sense of the whole room as well. So a fantastic formative assessment tool. And for this reason, I like to think of the maths routines as a bite. They're a small bite-sized activity in the classroom, but they're one that can lead to a feast. A feast for you in terms of your understanding of your students, but also importantly, a feast for your students in terms of where they're heading. Okay, your students will learn so much from one another, and they'll often also be quite surprised about what they know themselves. All right, let me just catch up on the chat and see where we're going. Okay, thank you for your comment, Andrea, on making fractions more manageable. I agree. Fractions are one of the most daunting topics for students and teachers alike. Okay, the more we can do to make it kind of easier for everyone in the room, I think the better. They're a vital part of students' conceptual understanding of mathematics as they progress in school, but also outside of school. They're one of the most common mathematical concepts that they'll be using. LB, you mentioned it can be used as a warm-up activity. Absolutely. Okay, particularly when you're using the same routine time and time again, it's a really easy one for students to then dive into straight away and start maths class with thinking really quickly. Some of you might find that you prefer to use it as some sort of brain break or as a way of finishing up your lesson as well. So there are different times and places that you can use it, but LB's point about using it as a warm-up is spot on. Let me show you where else you can go with which is larger, because I also see, like our first routine 2 groups, that it's actually one that you can use across lots of different topics. And it's not always immediately obvious where else it can go, but there's been some cool examples that I've been coming across recently that I really wanted to share with you. So let's take a look into it. So here's that animals example again, a slightly different one. One that, again, I love to show often as that first introduction to the routine. So students aren't kind of getting overwhelmed or confused by maths that, you know, is complex and learning how the routine works. Okay, we're just learning about the routine at this stage. And this sort of example is quite a nice one because you'll get some students who say, well, the elephant is larger because obviously an elephant in real life is larger than the cat. Other students will say, well, the cat is larger. Okay, and they can also be correct by justifying that in this picture, the image of the cat is larger. Okay, so even with this sort of kind of a little example, we can start to emphasize that the reasons that students give are important. And what might be obvious to one person in the room isn't always obvious to someone else. So those reasoning and those justifications really do matter. But let me show you some other maths examples as well. Take a look at this one quite quickly. Okay, there's sort of insights that might come up would be to do with area and perimeter quite often. And that will influence which one students will choose for which is larger. Okay, I'll keep going. And again, I'm going to make these slides available to you. I'll have a PDF copy of this slide deck, but also a Google slide version of these routines so that you can use these exact ones that you're seeing in this session today, or even create your own. And I'll share a template that you can use. Okay, here's another one. This one's great for not just students who are doing multiplication in the classroom, but students who are working with arithmetic laws and students who are even working with algebraic laws. Okay, and start to get them to pull apart numbers and put them back together again in different ways. Or this one, quite often with maths routines, it can be hard to find something that fits in the statistics area, but this one works really well, actually. And you could change the mean or median. You could make it median or mode, or mean or range. You can bring in any of those measures of central tendency or other aspects of statistics that you're working with. Okay. With this particular routine, which is larger, have a think about it. What is it that you expect your students are going to be able to do if they're engaging in this routine? Why is it that you might run this with your students? What do you hope that they'd get out of it? Yeah, justifying, reasoning, thinking about the maths and their own thinking. We've got multiple levels going on here. Thanks, Pamela. Proving, okay? This is a bite-sized step into proving their ideas and explaining their ideas. If they're doing it on a regular basis in just these short instances, it's going to help them to start to think that way more naturally when they're doing other maths problems, okay? These maths routines are almost a gateway to the thinking and the skills and the confidence that we might then value in other parts of the maths class. Comparisons, Dustin, yes. They're one of the most common questions that we think about mathematically when we're outside the maths classroom is around comparison. Which is larger, which is cheaper, which is faster, which is more efficient. These sorts of questions are all to do with forming comparisons. And this routine helps with making those comparisons. Okay, so it's actually a very practical one, and one that will help them to kind of keep applying their classroom skills outside of the classroom. Okay, I'm going to share the list that I came up with. And again, what we'll see is a lot of what I've got here is what you've shared in the chat already. Okay, so we've got comparing quantities. We're getting students to focus on units. Okay, and this is kind of related to the reasoning and justification aspect. Units being things like, are we talking about perimeter, or are we talking about area? What is the thing that we're justifying, using as a forming of our justification? Okay. We're helping students to see a lot of connections between ideas again, to articulate their thinking, to use mathematical reasoning, and to learn from peers. So there's some things, again, that are quite common between the two of these routines. But that comparison of quantities and that focus on what it is that we're actually using to justify our answer, these are two really unique properties of this particular routine. Now, there are 5 things that you can do to take routines like this really to the next level and to push them so much further so that your students get even more out of them. Whether it's which is larger, 2 groups, or any other routine that you're using in the classroom, there are 5 things you can do, and I want to share them with you now before we then have time for any questions that you might have, and where I tell you about where you can get access to these resources afterwards. Okay, so here's the first one. Start simple to build familiarity. Okay, that's whether it's the animals example or something else. When it's non-threatening, your students will learn how to use the routine and how it works before it gets challenging. Use less obvious examples, and when you do this, you'll give your students a reason to think. Okay, so these are examples that uncover interesting or uncommon ways of thinking about a concept. This is going back to that John Mason and Anne Watson quote, where they're thinking about the edges of mathematical ideas through the examples that you choose. Thirdly, to power up your maths routines, keep taking responses. Okay, this will encourage students to take risks with what they're sharing. Okay, they'll get the safe ideas out, and then you'll still be there waiting for more, and they'll think, oh, okay, all right, well, there was this idea that I had in mind. Let's share it. Okay. Safety here is created by that openness to accepting all different responses. And it's a gateway also to deeper thinking. Once students are comfortable to contribute, they're then going to be ready for further challenge. And it's quite amazing how far they can go at this point. Fourth, invite your students to make sense of the strategies that have been shared. Okay, so let's say you have done which is larger with one of the fraction examples that we looked at. You could stop it there, and look, your students would certainly get a lot out of it. But you can go even further by then stepping back and getting your students to make some observations of the strategies that have been shared, to look at, well, what is similar across all of these examples? Why are they similar? Or what's different between a couple of the different strategies that you've heard from your peers today? Okay, when they're doing this, they're then going to be in a position where they're making sense of the strategies even further and internalizing how they work. This can also be a good point to just choose one strategy, one that you think is really helpful to focus in on, and get students to have a chat with a partner about why it works, okay, to describe it in their own words, okay. These are all different ways for getting students to internalize these different ways of looking at a concept, okay. And the 5th strategy now for powering up your maths routine is to keep it short but regular. Okay, this is an opportunity for providing your students with spaced practice of concepts that you know that they get value from more work on. Okay, and spaced practice is something from the research around how the mind works and cognitive science that researchers have found time and time again makes one of the biggest differences in terms of retention. Okay, we've got affective components like student motivation and their confidence and their sense of self-efficacy in the classroom. And then we've got these cognitive components like spaced practice, which routines provide to students. They allow students to be reminded of core skills and concepts that you want them to see. Now, let's have, we're going to step back from these in a moment, but I want you to just take a moment to take any of these in. I'm going to catch up on just seeing if there's any questions in the chat. Is there, Lorraine, you asked, is there a spiral review already assembled with these types of reviews, like in a slide deck I can purchase? Lorraine, I'm not sure exactly what you mean by the first part of your question, but there is a slide deck that will be free for you of these. So I'll share with you at the end where you can get access to slides of these exactly.
Thank you.
No worries. Okay, so let's see what let's have a think about your next steps. With every session I run, I ask teachers to think about their next steps so that you are making a decision on what's going to happen after today. You're learning a whole lot in this virtual summit. Some stuff's going to stick with you, some stuff won't, by nature of kind of lots of learning going on. So quick summary of this session. We touched on three things. Firstly, a different view of routines and how they give space to exactly what you value in the classroom. I shared that De Bono quote about frameworks freeing up thinking. And then we looked at two powerful routines. The first one, two groups, and the second one, which is larger, two routines that you can use with students of any ages and across almost any topic. And then thirdly, we looked at 5 strategies for powering up your maths routines. Starting simple, using less obvious examples, keeping on taking ideas from your students so that they will be open to taking risks, inviting them to analyze the responses and keeping them short but regular. So this is what we're covered. Now, take another 30 seconds again to jot down what one thing is that you're going to make sure that you do as a result of this session. I'd love to hear it in the chat once you've thought of that idea. And if you've got multiple ideas, then by all means, write it down and commit yourself to those as well. Yeah, there's some really beautiful actions that you're choosing to take on as a result of today. I want to call out a couple of them that have stuck out. So this one, be more consistent with opening maths classes with routines. I think there's this really tricky balance to strike in maths class between giving students novelty and new ideas that will kind of burst a bubble and re-energize them, but also providing a routine to provide for a sense of regularity, comfort, structure, and opportunity to go deeper. And so that consistency that this person's described in the chat, it goes so far. A few people have talked about sharing with your colleagues. Great. And it's a great one to kind of collectively crowdsource examples. If you're in a school where you do a lot of planning together, you can, create a few topics of these routines very quickly by sharing them together. You're trying to figure out Kathy's trying to figure out how to use these with your geometry students. Yeah, I would recommend going to your resources that you already have. So if you've got some stock standard programs, worksheets, textbooks that you already use, look for some examples that you think are interesting and actually take them out and either adapt them or use them as is in your routines. They're a really good starting point. Betty's going to offer some quick PD to our teachers. Awesome. All right. These are really great insights. Thanks everyone for sharing them and for sharing how you're going to commit to what you're going to do next. Now, if you're interested in the sorts of ideas that you've been hearing about in this session today, let me share a bit more about the program that I run with other teachers. And then I'll also share with you where you can get access to today's resources. So if if you're keen, if you're keen to deepen and enrich your teaching practice, in my program, we bring teachers of all backgrounds together, from all levels of teaching experience, elementary, middle, high school. We come together regularly to talk about maths, to talk about teaching and improving pedagogical knowledge, pedagogical content knowledge as well. If you want to help your students become stronger, more confident mathematical thinkers, and you don't just want your students to pass tests or get through the content mindlessly, but you want more, okay, again, I think you'd be quite interested in what my program has to offer, and let me tell you a bit more about it. It's called a Circles membership, and it's a professional learning program with regular live workshops on unique topics, and I'll show you some of the upcoming topics in just a moment, where we share new maths tasks as well as tools and strategies on a regular basis. All our members get access to a private members library with a whole bank of really rich, accessible, and challenging tasks, as well as video resources. And you also join in a global teacher community that stretches from North America to Europe to Australia to Asia and all other corners of the world. So it's a really fantastic group of passionate and switched on teachers. This is the program that we've got coming up next year. At each of our sessions, we have guest presenters who come in, people like Pam Harris and Dan Finkel, and our guest presenters choose a couple of tasks that they really love to share with you that are related to the session themes. We choose themes that are deliberately designed to be different to what you might see elsewhere, and we never run the same session again. So you know that what you'll be getting is something quite new. So if you're interested in checking out this Circles membership, head on over to mathsteachercircles.org and you can find out a whole lot more information there. And lastly, let me tell you about where you can get access to today's slides and resources. If you head to mathsteachercircles.org/MMM23 and enter your details, you'll get automatic access to all of today's resources. And I'll also share a few other goodies with you that I think you'll enjoy. So I want to thank you so much for being part of this session. Yes, I'll put the link to what I've just shared here in the chat. And I want to thank you for being part of this session and really sharing your insights as well as your expertise with others in the group. That's made a big difference to helping the experience of these routines be a lot richer. So thank you very much for that. And I hope you enjoy the rest of your time in the summit. If you've got any more questions, please do hang around to chat.
Awesome stuff, my friends. I see the chat is livening up again and everyone's saying thank you. Great sessions. Share that big takeaway. I know you were sharing some a little bit earlier. And remember, friends, something you see, if you took a picture of something, if you took a screenshot and you thought there was something worth keeping for yourself, don't keep it to yourself. Share it out on social, tag the speaker, tag Math Moments in it. And let's get more people aware of these great routines, these great ideas, and ultimately it will help those students that we're all here to try to better serve. So thank you so much, my friend, for all the awesome sharing here. Your powerful math routines for all learners. What a great session. I loved your key ideas that you had, or key concepts that you had, sort of throughout your session. And many, many great opportunities for people to do some thinking and reflecting on their own situation, their own context, and what that might look like in their classroom. So thank you again there, Michaela. We are also going to be taking this session along with all the other live sessions, and we're going to be putting them up into the Summit site until Sunday evening at which time our license for the Summit software goes away. But don't worry, we have it on our Academy. All of those uploads are going straight into the Academy. Current Academy members see the replays there already, and they can access all of the previous year's summits for the past 4 years. This is our 5th year of our free virtual summit, and we have over 100 summit sessions available there for you. We also have self-paced courses and 60 or over 60 now problem-based units of study with full teacher guides and all the resources you need to get your kids thinking, but then also to help structure that thinking by the end of each and every lesson so that they're not just walking away with a fun, interesting task, but more or less the big ideas, the strategies, and the models that are going to help serve them throughout the rest of your school year and beyond in their K-12 journey. So you can do that on the Summit site. Upgrade your ticket for $39 for 2 months inside the Academy to keep those replays going. You can cancel at any time, and we're just hoping that you'll find some value there. Remember, your certificates of attendance are available starting Monday. For those who have extended access to replays, you can generate your certificates at any point during your membership in the Academy. So there is no cutoff date for the certificates you could generate through keeping access to the replays. Once again, in the chat, friends, do me a huge favor. Thank our wonderful speaker again, Michaela. It's been a pleasure. I hope you enjoy the rest of the day. It sounds like you've got a lot more day left ahead of you than we do. So you
There's a
go
huge
ahead.
amount of day left.
Yes, there you go. There you go. You get going, and I hope it's the best day ever. And we're looking forward to seeing some of the posts that people are sharing on social media of their big takeaways.
Awesome. Thank you, Carl.
Take care, everybody. Have a great day.